Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're going microscopic.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, get ready to explore the world of microorganisms, these
Yeah.
tiny life forms that we can't even see without a microscope.
Mm.
But they have a huge impact on pretty much everything.
Yeah, most people don't even realize we're constantly interacting with them.
Right. They're everywhere. But before we get into all that good stuff, the good, the bad, the essential, what are microorganisms? Like, what are we actually talking about here?
Well, imagine a little drop of water, like after a rainstorm, clinging to a leaf or like that fuzzy mold on a strawberry that's been in the fridge a little too long.
All right.
Under a microscope, those are teeming with microscopic life. And there's four main groups. We're going to focus on bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and algae.
So not just like the green stuff in ponds then.
No. Algae is just one group. Each of these groups has its own, characteristics, roles to play in the whole scheme of things. For example, bacteria are single-celled organisms, while fungi can range from single-celled yeasts to those big mushrooms we love to put on pizza.
Right.
Protozoa are also single-celled, but a bit more complex than bacteria.
Okay.
And then there are viruses.
Viruses, those always seem to get their own special category.
Yeah.
What makes them so different?
Well, they're microscopic, but technically not considered alive in the same way as the other microorganisms. Viruses need a host cell to reproduce. They can't exist on their own. They have to hijack, the machinery of a living cell to make more copies of themselves.
So that's why they cause so many diseases.
Ah.
They're like hijacking our cells, making us sick.
Exactly. Think of common illnesses like a cold, the flu, even chickenpox. Those are all caused by viruses, just doing what they do best, replicating.
Okay, so we've got these tiny organisms, some good, some bad, some just hanging out there everywhere.
Yeah.
Where do they actually live? What kind of environments?
That's the most amazing thing. Microorganisms, they are incredibly adaptable, and they can thrive in pretty much every environment imaginable. From the icy landscapes of Antarctica to the scorching heat of volcanic vents, you'll find them in the soil, water, air, and even inside other living organisms, including us.
So we're talking ultimate survivors here.
Yes.
They've conquered every corner of the planet.
They have. Their adaptability is just a testament to the power of evolution and the diversity of life on Earth.
Wow, this is fascinating. But I have to admit, when I think about microorganisms, my mind jumps to the ones that cause trouble. You know, the ones that give us food poisoning or make us sick? Can we talk about those for a minute?
Of course. It's important to understand both sides of the coin. Those troublemakers are called pathogens.
Pathogens.
Yes, and they're the disease-causing microorganisms that can spread through various means, like air-water food, or even direct contact.
So when we talk about communicable diseases, like cholera, the common cold chicken pox, or tuberculosis, those are all caused by these microscopic villains.
Precisely. And some pathogens have evolved these clever ways to spread. Think of mosquitoes transmitting malaria, dengue, or even just a housefly landing on food and contaminating it with bacteria that cause food poisoning.
That's a good reminder to always keep food covered and wash our hands.
Always.
But speaking of food, how do those good microorganisms come into play? I know they're involved in making some of our favorite things right.
Absolutely. This is where the friendly side of microorganisms really shines. Many of our favorite foods and drinks rely on a process called fermentation, which is driven by specific types of microorganisms, especially bacteria and yeasts.
So is this like how yeast makes bread rise? I know it gives bread that fluffy texture, but how does that work?
You got it. Yeast, a type of fungi, consumes sugars in the dough and releases carbon dioxide gas as a byproduct.
Okay.
And those little gas bubbles get trapped, causing the dough to rise and creating those airy pockets we love in bread.
So it's the yeast's breath that's making the bread rise.
Exactly.
That's so cool. And is it the same process for something like beer?
It is. In beer brewing, yeast converts sugars from grains into alcohol and carbon dioxide, which gives beer its characteristic fizz.
Wait, so if it's the same process, how does yeast create alcohol in beer but not in bread? Is it a different type of yeast, or does something else happen along the way?
That's a great question. While the basic process of fermentation is similar, different types of yeast are used for different purposes. Brewer's yeast, for example, is specially cultivated to produce alcohol efficiently, while baker's yeast is optimized for carbon dioxide production.
So it's like they each have their own specialty, just like in a real kitchen.
Exactly.
I love that.
And when it comes to making yogurt and cheese, That's the work of bacteria, specifically lactic acid bacteria. They convert milk sugar into lactic acid, giving yogurt and cheese their tangy flavor and creamy texture.
Okay, so we got microscopic bakers and brewers. Are there any other culinary skills in their repertoire?
Oh, there are plenty. Think of fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut pickles, even soy sauce. Those all rely on the transformative power of microorganisms. And let's not forget about the role of bacteria in making idli and dosa batter,
Oh, yeah.
which are popular South Indian dishes.
Wow, it's like a whole world of flavors unlocked by these tiny chefs. I'm starting to see why people say microorganisms are essential to life. It's not just about staying healthy, it's about enjoying all the delicious things they help create.
Absolutely. And we haven't even touched on their roles in the environment and medicine yet.
Wait, there's more. Okay, I'm officially hooked. Tell me everything.
Well, some bacteria are like environmental superheroes. They're essential for decomposing organic waste, breaking down dead plants and animals into simpler substances that can be reused by other organisms. It's nature's recycling system at its finest.
They're like tiny garbage collectors keeping the planet clean. That's amazing. And what about their role in medicine? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, think about antibiotics. Those life-saving medications we use to fight bacterial infections, many of them are actually derived from microorganisms themselves.
Right. So the things that help us fight off bad bacteria are actually made from good bacteria.
It's not quite that simple,
Yeah.
but you're on the right track. The classic example is penicillin, which was discovered from a type of mold. It revolutionized medicine and led to the development of many other antibiotics that have saved countless lives.
So we've got gourmet chefs, garbage collectors, and now doctors. It seems like the microbial world has a whole range of professions.
Indeed. And they're all working tirelessly, whether we're aware of it or not. It really is incredible how these tiny organisms have such a huge impact on our lives. And speaking of impact, let's talk a little bit more about those disease-causing pathogens. You know, the ones we were talking about earlier. I think it's important to understand how they actually cause harm.
You're right. We talked about how they spread through the air, water, food, contact. But what do they actually do once they're inside us? How do they make us feel sick?
That's a great question. It's a little bit complex, but I'll try to keep it simple. Essentially, these pathogens, whether they're bacteria, viruses, other types, they've developed these strategies to invade our bodies and disrupt our normal functions.
So they're like tiny invaders wreaking havoc on our systems.
In a way, yeah. Some bacteria, for example, they produce toxins that can directly damage our cells and tissues. It's like a microscopic poison that interferes with how our body works.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about viruses? How do they cause damage?
Viruses, on the other hand, they're a bit sneakier. They work by hijacking our cells, using the cell's own machinery to make more copies of themselves. It's like a hostile takeover at the cellular level.
So they're using our cells as factories to produce more virus particles. No wonder we feel so awful when we're sick.
Exactly. And as those virus particles multiply, they can destroy the host cell, leading to more widespread damage and the symptoms we experience as illness.
It's like a microscopic battle going on inside us. So how does our body fight back against these invaders?
Well, that's where our immune system comes into play. It's a complex network of cells and processes that work together to defend us against these pathogens. Think of it as our body's internal security force.
So it's like our own personal army, constantly on patrol, looking for those microbial invaders?
Exactly. Our immune system has a variety of ways to identify and neutralize these threats. Some cells, like white blood cells, they directly attack and destroy pathogens. Others produce antibodies, which are like specialized weapons that target specific invaders.
It's amazing how our body has all these intricate defense mechanisms that we're usually not even aware of.
It really is. And the more we learn about how our immune system works, the better we can support it and stay healthy.
That makes those antibiotics and vaccines seem even more incredible. It's like we're borrowing the power of microorganisms to help our own defenses.
You're right. It's a fantastic example of how science can learn from nature and develop treatments and preventive measures.
Okay, so we've covered the microbial heroes that help us make delicious food, clean up the environment, even protect us from disease. And we've talked about the villains, those disease-causing pathogens that try to make us sick. But I'm curious, what about the microbes that aren't necessarily good or bad, but just kind of exist? Do they serve a purpose?
Ah, yes. The neutral zone of the microbial world. It's true that not all microorganisms have a direct, obvious impact on our health or well-being. Some simply coexist with us, inhabiting our skin, our gut, and other parts of our body without causing any harm.
So they're like microscopic roommates, just hanging out, going about their business.
Exactly. And in many cases, these neutral microbes can actually be beneficial. They can help crowd out those harmful bacteria, taking up space and resources, so those pathogens can't take hold.
It's like having a microbial security team, making sure the bad guys don't get too comfortable.
Precisely. And some research suggests that these neutral microbes may even play a role in training our immune system, helping it learn to distinguish between friend and foe.
So they might actually be helping our immune system become stronger. That's wild. This whole microscopic world is so much more complex and interconnected than I ever imagined.
It truly is. The more we learn about microorganisms, the more we realize how much we still don't know. And that's what makes this field of study so exciting. There's always something new to discover.
Okay, so far we've got heroes, villains,
Yeah.
and even a neutral zone in this microbial world. We've talked about how they affect our health, our food, even the environment. Is there anything we've missed?
Well, there's one more fascinating area I think we should explore, the use of microorganisms in biotechnology.
Biotechnology, that sounds a bit futuristic. What do microorganisms have to do with that?
It might sound like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but biotechnology is this rapidly growing field that harnesses the power of microorganisms for various applications. We're talking about things like producing medicines, developing new materials, even cleaning up the environment.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What kind of things can we actually do with these tiny organisms?
The possibilities are practically endless. For example, scientists are using bacteria to produce insulin for people with diabetes. They're also exploring the use of microbes to break down pollutants and clean up oil spills.
Wow, so they're like tiny bioengineers working for the benefit of humanity. That's incredible.
It's an incredibly promising area of research with the potential to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. We're just beginning to tap into the incredible diversity and capabilities of the microbial world.
It makes you wonder, what else will we discover? It sounds like we've only just scratched the surface of what's possible.
Absolutely. There are likely countless microbial secrets still waiting to be uncovered. Who knows what incredible applications we'll find in the future?
Okay, so we've got gourmet chefs, garbage collectors, doctors, bioengineers. It really does seem like the microbial world has a whole range of professions.
Indeed. And they're all working tirelessly, whether we're aware of it or not, shaping our world in profound ways.
You know, it really makes you appreciate the unseen world around us.
Yeah.
All those tiny organisms going about their business, playing their part in the grand scheme of things.
It certainly does, and it underscores the importance of understanding these microorganisms, not just for our own health, but for the health of the planet as a whole.
I have to say this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We've gone from those basic building blocks of what microorganisms are to their roles in food production, medicine, the environment, and now even biotechnology.
It has been quite a journey. From the smallest microbe to the global scale of climate change, it all connects.
Absolutely. But before we get too carried away, I think it's time to shift gears and move on to some final thoughts for this deep dive. Where do we even begin to wrap this up after such a comprehensive exploration?
That's a good question. We've covered so much ground already. But perhaps we can leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question, something to encourage them to continue exploring this fascinating world on their own.
I love that idea. A little something to spark their curiosity and keep those microbial gears turning. So we've explored this whole incredible diversity of microorganisms and all their roles in our food, our health, and even the environment. And it's mind-boggling to think about just how much these tiny organisms influence our lives,
It really is. And, as we learn more about climate change and its impact on the planet, it kind of raises this big question of how might those shifts in, temperature, weather patterns, and all those overall environmental conditions affect those microscopic populations?
I've never really thought about it like that. I mean, usually we talk about climate change in terms of its effect on those big visible things, melting glaciers, rising sea levels, extreme weather. But it makes sense that those tiny sensitive organisms would be impacted too.
Absolutely. And changes in those microbial communities could have these ripple effects through the entire web of life. And some microorganisms might thrive in warmer temperatures while others struggle to survive. And that delicate balance of ecosystems could be disrupted.
So some of the good guys might suffer and some of the bad guys might flourish. That's a kind of scary thought.
It's definitely a complex issue with a lot of unknowns. but it really underscores the importance of studying microorganisms and understanding how they interact with their environment. We need to figure out how they might adapt to these changing conditions and what the implications of those adaptations might be.
It's like a whole new layer of complexity to the climate change puzzle.
Hmm.
We're not just talking about those big visible changes, but also these invisible shifts in the microbial world that can have these huge consequences.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that even those smallest organisms can have a profound impact on the planet and our lives.
Well, this deep dive has certainly been an eye-opener. I mean, we started by uncovering this amazing diversity and adaptability of microorganisms, learning about their roles in food production and medicine, and even their sometimes harmful effects as pathogens. We explored their super crucial role in the nitrogen cycle, and then started thinking about how climate change might impact this unseen world.
It has been quite the journey. From the smallest microbe to the global scale of climate change, it all connects,
It really does. So
Yeah.
what's the big takeaway for our listeners today? What do we want them to walk away with after this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is just that microorganisms are everywhere, and they matter. You
Yeah.
know, they're essential to life as we know it, and we need to appreciate their diversity, their power, and also their vulnerability as we face these changing environmental conditions.
I love that. And maybe, just maybe, this deep dive has sparked a little curiosity in our listeners. And they'll look at that piece of moldy cheese in their fridge or that drop of water on a spider web in the garden with a whole new sense of wonder.
I hope so. There's a whole universe waiting to be discovered right under our noses, or I guess under a microscope.
Well said. A huge thanks to you for guiding us through this amazing invisible world, and to all of you out there for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those microscopic gears turning.